Welcome to Jammin' with Jason Mefford, a show where we discuss topics relevant to chief audit executives and professionals in audit, risk, and compliance. We discuss the technical and soft skills needed to navigate the minefields of organizations. You hear best practices and practical advice for helping you advance your career, and we'll even talk about music, mindfulness, and psychology, because we can. So sit back and relax while you listen to the #1 podcast in the world for internal auditors, unscripted and unedited. Welcome to another episode of Jamming with Jason. Hey, welcome back, my friends. Today, I want to jump in and talk a little bit about playing the game without help equals disaster. So if you try to play a game and you don't have any help, how that can end up in disaster for you. So I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about that, but also obviously give you some tips for how you can avoid that disaster. Because that's really what we're trying to do, is make sure that we don't get ourselves in trouble. And I'm going to tell you up front, many of you are competing as you are playing at a disadvantage. And I'm going to get more into that here in this episode. Now, before we get started with today's episode, I just want to make sure and let everybody know that we are now accepting new member applications for the Chief Audit Executive Forum. So if you are a chief audit executive, and if you are serious about elevating the status of internal audit in your organization and in improving your executive presence and being able to get best practices and thought leadership from like-minded chief audit executives from around the world, if you're that kind of person, then the Chief Audit Executive Forum is right for you. And as I said, we're accepting new member applications right now. We only do this a couple times a year. And so if you are in that category, I've got a link down below. Make sure and click on the link, check out the information, submit your application, and book your interview. Now, I'm telling you this because the open enrollment period is pretty short. You have to have your application in before the end of January for you to be considered for membership going forward. So get that in. Now let's get back to today's topic, which is playing the game without help equals disaster. So how I came up with what I wanted to talk to you today about is it's football season in the United States. So I've been watching a lot of American football. Now, for those of you in other parts of the world, that's not to confuse with what in America we call soccer and you call football, but this is American football, gridiron. And it's a sport that I enjoyed playing, and also enjoy watching. And so since it's football season, I've been watching a lot of football. And when you do that, you can notice, that there's each of the teams as they come in and they're playing and competing with each other. Each team is trying to win, right? You want to score more points than the other team and end up walking away with a win. Now, just like football, life can be a long game. And it's in fact a game that we are playing. And so this is why I want to talk a little bit about football. So you can tell, when the teams start playing, everybody comes out and everybody's excited and they get started and they start playing. And what inevitably happens is, one team starts to do really well. The other team tries to make some adjustments and comes back, and they kind of go back and forth throughout the game. Now, one of the things that makes the difference between a good or great football team and the one that usually ends up losing, there's several things. One of them is kind of relates to the mindset, and some also relates to kind of the coaching and the support that they receive. So as an example, let me just kind of walk through kind of a typical scenario that you can end up seeing in a game. So the one team comes out and they really start off strong. They go down and they score really quick. Maybe they have a turnover or do something else. They score again really quick. And all of a sudden they're up in the score a couple of scores. And so they're feeling really good about themselves. Well, at that point, of course, the other team is trying to figure out what happened and make changes so that they can come back. And so I remember there was one of the recent games that I was watching. One team started off very strong in the first quarter. And in American football, it's a 60-minute game made up of 4 15-minute quarters. And so what happened was the one team came out really strong in the first quarter, and they ended up 3 scores ahead of the other team. And so they were feeling really good. They had some good quick wins. And so you could tell that the energy on the sideline was really great. This team was really excited. They thought that they were just going to blow away the other competitor. Now, the other competitor, of course, was again trying to figure out what can they do different. And so in the second quarter, they started to make some changes. And they came back and scored pretty quickly. And it ended up becoming a tie game again at halftime. And so everything that first team had done in the first quarter got kind of wiped away. And now they had the second half of the game to compete with each other. And so what happened was, the team that came back in the third quarter, they continued to come back more and more and more and more. And all of a sudden you could tell that the one team started to give up. Their mental toughness kind of went away. You could see that the energy on the sideline was not the same. And it was very obvious about, partway into the third quarter that the one team would end up winning. And you could tell because of the energy that was going on, but also there was something different. Now, both of these teams were well coached, but one was better coached than the other. When that first team got down to begin with, instead of kind of pouting and say, woe is me, life is so hard, the coaches got involved and helped to instruct and coach the players on what they were doing wrong so that they could end up making changes. They were there to help correct, to give guidance on what to do differently, but they were also there to encourage people. And one of the coaches said things like, we've been here before, and we know exactly what this is like. We can get through this. It's those kind of things that we need to hear when we are down. Sometimes we get out ahead, we have some quick wins, and then all of a sudden things don't go our way. And as a result of that, we start kind of getting down on ourselves. We don't know what to do. And without having some sort of support, like in a coach, in the sporting example, we end up starting to get into our head and we lose the game in our mind. And like I said, I've watched sports teams over and over do this, where very shortly into the game, the one team has effectively given up. Now, again, the difference between, good teams and great teams and those that are just kind of, a lot of times ends up being the coaching, the mental preparation that the team and physical preparation that the team has had before they get started, but also the coaching and the support during the game as well. Now, excuse me, another reason that I bring this up and why it kind of ties in today with playing the game without help equals disaster is this. Let's assume that there's 2 football teams playing, and one of the football teams receives, has very high quality coaches on their team. They have good players and they practice a lot. They do the work that they need to, both the physical and the mental mindset work during the practice. They get to the game, they have a good plan, they start to execute their plan. If they need to change things, the coaches are right there to help provide support and kind of an external view on what's going on, continue the motivation, continue making changes. That team's going to do pretty well. Now, what if the other team shows up, and again, they've got pretty good athletes, but there's no coaching staff? They're just all individuals that are out there. They've maybe trained very hard physically. They're good athletes, but they've never really played together as a team. They're all just kind of out there as individuals without that support or without the coaching staff. How do you think that game is going to go? I think the team that has the support and the good coaching is going to kick the other one's butt. And that's what ends up happening. Often, again, you can see where teams that really have just individual players that kind of do what they want to do and what they think is right, they don't compete in the long term as well as teams that are well coached and well trained and that have all of that support during the game. So why am I bringing this up? And here's the dirty little secret that I wanted to let you in on that I told you at the beginning of the podcast. And it's this: many of you are competing at a disadvantage. So others in your organization, for example, if you're a chief audit executive, the other executives in your organization are receiving coaching and going through executive programs. They're learning how to be an executive and are getting that support. What I find most of the time is chief audit executives are not getting some of that support. So of course, when you are comparing or you're trying to play the game of executive politics, who do you think is going to win? The one who's been the executive who's been coached and trained and knows what to do and has this, executive program support, or the one that doesn't have any of that support? Well, I got to tell you, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be that person who has that support. So as I said, in our profession, a lot of executives are not getting the help. They need the help if they want to be able to compete with and be on the same level as the other executives in their organization. Now, this is true not only just for chief audit executives, but really for anybody in your career. If you're not taking time, right, to develop yourself and develop the different skills that you need to, where others in the organization are, those other people are going to beat you in the game of life. So let me go through and talk about a few things that you can do to be able to reduce or lower this disadvantage that many of you may have. So the first one is, you'll hear me talk a lot about, it requires both technical and soft skills if you ever want to get to be considered a trusted advisor. You have to have the balance of both. You have to be high in technical and high in soft skills. So here's one of the mistakes that I see a lot of people doing. They spend all their time on developing their technical skills, and they're not getting the soft skills training. So again, you may be very technical in what you are doing, but if you don't have the soft skills, you will not be at the same level as your peers in the organization. They're working on their soft skills. They're getting that information. They're getting the support. They're having executive coaches. They're participating in executive programs, and they're developing their soft skills. So if you are not, you are always going to be at a disadvantage to them. So, excuse me, what do? We need to develop our soft skills. We need to actually take time to be able to develop our soft skills. What are some of these things? Obviously around communication, but in this instance, more so the verbal communication. Also things around influence. How do you influence other people? How do you build relationships with other people? How do you negotiate? How do you come to, a mutually agreeable compromise? How do you make a business case? That also is a soft skill. A lot of times people think, well, I'm just gonna use the numbers and that's gonna make a business case. That doesn't happen. In fact, 80% of decisions are based on emotion. So it almost doesn't matter what financials you put there. If you can tell a good story and you have the good soft skills, then you're going to win. Okay. So that's one of the things that you can start doing. You can start trying to improve and give yourself those opportunities to where you can actually develop your soft skills. Now, another thing is, you really need to learn how to play the corporate game, if you will. Okay. And now I know sometimes, we like to think, well, we're different. We're independent. We don't have to play those same games. Well, if just like if you go into a football game and everybody else is playing based on a set of rules and you decide that you want to be different and you're just going to play with some different rules, it's not going to go well for you. You have to learn how to play the game. And to move into being an executive with executive presence, you really have to learn how to manage your stakeholders. You have to learn how to manage your staff, and you have to learn how to manage yourself. There's those three things that you have to learn how to do them and learn how to do them well. So just as I was talking before, so much of the time we focus on on technical skills only. We have to also balance soft skills. So in these other three areas, again, we may spend a lot of time trying to learn how to, manage or lead our staff, but we don't spend enough time on learning how to kind of lead and influence stakeholders and really how to, self-manage ourselves. A lot of times that self-management gets left off because we think, oh, we don't really need that. Well, you know what? I know a lot of executives and a lot of millionaires all over the world. And the one thing that I notice from those successful executives and successful millionaires, they spend a lot of time developing themselves. Okay. And this is more than just, the technical skills that we were talking about before. It's around the soft skills and in how to not only manage themselves but be able to get the maximum potential out of themselves. And what that means usually is that we have to do some things that we're not used to doing. Because to manage yourself is probably one of the hardest things that we can learn throughout our life. It requires, developing certain habits and doing certain things, having that self-integrity so that we're always doing and acting the way that we believe that we need to be. And really, like I said, we have to balance all three of those areas. So again, if you're coming in and you maybe don't understand the rules of the game, you need to learn the rules. If you're not doing a good job of being able to balance, stakeholder, staff, and self-management, well, you're going to need to learn how to do that and how to actually focus on some of those other areas. Because again, if you do one well, but you don't do the other ones very well, you're never going to really be viewed or seen as a real executive. It's kind of like, part of the developing yourself. If you consider, I've used this analogy before, junior varsity versus varsity sports. Well, if you're not doing all of those things, you're really playing at a junior varsity level when all the other executives in your organization are playing varsity. So if you ever want to be able to play varsity ball with them and actually have their trust and respect, You have to develop yourself and start playing and acting like a varsity player. And again, a lot of that goes back to learning how to manage and lead stakeholders, manage and lead your staff, and manage and lead yourself. So those are some of the things that we need to be looking at and working on, because as I said to begin with, the reality that I see too often, which really pains me, is internal audit isn't really given some of the resources or the budget that we feel like we need. And one of those areas, I believe, is in this coaching and an executive program type of an area, where others in the organization are receiving the help and we just kind of get left out. Now, I don't think it's all because the budget's not there. I think it's because we're not asking for it and we don't realize how important it is. Because most of us come from a pretty technical background, we tend to believe that if we are technically competent, if we are technically strong, that everything else will be okay. But life is about balance. And if you're really going to play the game, you have to learn how to balance. So again, back to our football analogy. If one team is really great at offense, but they don't do very good at defense, they're not considered a balanced team. If they only pass the ball and never run, they're not a balanced team. The only way to really, truly win and kind of go to the Super Bowl and win is you have to be balanced. You have to be good on offense as well as defense. You have to run the ball and you have to pass the ball. And if you don't have that balance, if you don't develop that balance, it's pretty hard to become a champion. And so again, that's why I'm talking about some of these different areas, so that you start to understand maybe, where you have some weakness that you need to work on, that you need a little bit of help with, because that's the only way we're going to get better. And if we don't have that balance between, how we deal with stakeholders, staff, and self, and if we don't have that balance between technical and soft skills, it's going to be really hard for us to compete at the varsity level. So again, my friends, if you're trying to play the game without help, it's going to be hard. So how do you overcome that? You actually get the help. Figure out what it is. Think about some of these areas that I've talked about today and where you can use the help. And so that way you can actually start creating a development plan to be able to help you get to where you want to be. Now, to end, one of those areas for chief audit executives is the Chief Audit Executive Forum. It's a group of like-minded chief audit executives from around the world, where you can actually get and learn best practices. You can get some thought leadership from these people, but also it's a way for you to be able to elevate the status of internal audit in your organization. You learn how to do some of these things that we've been talking about today. How do I manage stakeholders? How do I manage my staff and myself? How do I balance my technical and my soft skills? What are those soft skills that I need to develop to really move into that executive presence and really start to be perceived as a trusted advisor and gain the trust and respect of others in your organization? That's why the Chief Audit Executive Forum exists. It is an executive program to be able to help chief audit executives get that support that they need so they can actually play varsity ball with the other executives in the organization. So as I said to begin at the beginning, if you're serious about really trying to do those things and you're a chief audit executive, make sure and check out the link below. Go out, look at the information, submit your application, and book your interview so that we can see and get that membership application to see if you can then be invited into the Chief Audit Executive Forum. So with that, my friends, again, remember, don't try to play the game alone. Get some help. Figure out where that is, because again, as we move forward, as we play this game, and it is a long game of your career, little steps along the way and making you better is going to get you to that point that you've always dreamed of being. And by developing ourselves and doing better, with ourselves, with our staff, with our stakeholders, we really can elevate the status of internal audit in our organizations and be viewed as trusted advisors by the rest of the organization. So with that, I'm going to sign off for this week, but go out and keep on rocking in the audit world. And I will talk to you next week on the next episode of Jamming with Jason. Take care. And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Jamming with Jason. Keep on rocking in the audit world. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you later on the next show. If you'd like to earn continuing professional education for listening to today's episode, head on over to C-Risk Academy at ondemand.criskacademy.com. And that's C as in the letter C, riskacademy.com. Not only do you get a CPE certificate, but you also will have access to the video version of today's show. The views and opinions expressed on this show are that of the individuals and not of their respective organizations.